Good morning, Composition 2 students. Another beautiful day, and Chuseok is only a couple days off, so this will be your video lecture for this week, and I hope you enjoy your holiday. Coincidentally, we are on the topic of food this week again, which is appropriate because Chuseok involves a lot of delicious food that your family has prepared, I hope. It's a time to celebrate your ancestors and the harvest and to be thankful for the things that you have. So today we're going to talk about actually exotic food, which normally I think is not a part of the Chuseok menu. But for people who are not from Korea, Chuseok food itself is, you might consider it exotic because it's not something familiar. But before we get into that topic, let me just point out that I'm starting to receive the assignments that you're to be graded on about the origin of food. Thus far, I've really just skimmed over a few of them and looked at titles and so on. And as per my instructions, the format looks good. People are choosing appropriate topics, not just saying, well, this is a food and this is where it comes from, but explaining some sort of history related to that, you know, the mythology or the health properties of it, like I suggested. So that's fantastic that you're doing that. Now, most students are including some references. Again, some people are including references in Korean. It takes me too long to read through it. It's just a matter of my Korean ability that I can't verify the content of a Korean article fast enough. I can't be efficient enough to actually tell. So you need to include English sources. And in fact, I've already found a few mistakes. You can't take a newspaper or a blog, or as I said, and use that as a credible source. Case in point, a student wrote about the history of an apple. They wrote all kinds of interesting things about, you know, Adam and Eve and the apple and, you know, Newton's apple. And of course, there is a famous company now that uses apple as a symbol. That's all great stuff. But the beginning of the paper states that the apple came from the Balkans. The Balkan Peninsula includes former Yugoslavia, which is, you know, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Serbia, and Albania, and other countries. And unfortunately, that's not where the apple comes from. The apple, the original species of apple, comes from Kazakhstan, which is Central Asia. It's thousands of kilometers away from the Balkans. The Balkans never had apples until Alexander the Great brought them back. That's a legend. Nobody really knows, but the apple comes from Kazakhstan, not from the Balkans. So you have to be careful. You have to do your research. You can't just click on the first link. These days, people always accuse of, you know, people of Googling something and taking the first two hits on the Google engine. I wouldn't be surprised if some of you look on Naver and you search for something, search some keywords, and the first two hits that you get, the first two sources you use. You can't do that, unfortunately, because there's a lot of misinformation on the internet. The internet is not a source that's credible unto itself. You have to dig deeper. When you get a newspaper article and they tell you a story, that newspaper article has its own sources, right? And so a newspaper article itself is not a primary source. You have to find out where that reporter got their information. If they got it from an individual, like firsthand, they interviewed the president and the president said this and they quoted them, that's a primary source, I would argue. But if you're just reading what somebody's writing about something and you have no idea where the ideas came from, that doesn't count. So you got to keep that in mind, because at a certain point you're going to get caught. Like if you claim apples come from one place in the world, but the consensus and the scientific evidence says it doesn't, it comes from somewhere else, then you're going to have at some point you're going to get caught. Okay, so you have to be thorough when you're looking for your sources. You have to be careful and you have to find correct information. And that's not easy these days, but I think that's part of writing well these days. Is we have a lot of information, maybe too much information. In the past, you would have to go to a library and that you would get a book that was written by a famous person and that would have been checked and edited and approved and paid for. But now you can go on the internet and find information all over the place. And there's a good side and a bad side to that. But you have to be careful where you get your information from. Okay? So that having been said, generally just the idea that you're being critical and you're thinking about beyond just where the fruit or the vegetable or the plant came from, but how it's been applied, how it's been used, how it's been perceived. That's good. So I'm pleased to say you're following the instructions well. Today the topic is still food, but we're gonna turn it a little bit away from talking about where things came from and how they've changed towards just the appreciation of different types of food and being exposed to food in general. So although we have a globalized environment and food gets shared all over the place, there are these types of food that people eat for certain reasons. Sometimes it's because there's not very many of them. Sometimes it's because it's got some sort of symbolic, meaning. The eating of it is symbolic to people, and sometimes it's because there's nothing else to eat. So when you think of the word exotic, I usually do this in my class when we're all together. This would probably make a good Zoom lecture, actually, because I always ask my students, what does the word exotic mean to you? And everybody has in their head, when they think of the word exotic, probably that you get some images. When I was young, I think exotic symbolized some sort of like person who I'd never seen before, who was moving maybe a dance or wearing some clothing that was very colorful and different than anything I had seen. That's what I imagined exotic to be. And as I get older, many of those things become less exotic. It's sort of a perceptual thing. So something that's exotic to me may not seem exotic to you at all. When it comes to food, the same rule applies. Something might be a very common food in one country, so they don't consider it. They consider it a normal everyday thing. But when you go there, you've got to have that food because you've never tried it. I think a good one is frog's legs. This section of the chapter starts out, the title is Bugs, Rats, and Other Tasty Dishes. Not usually, I wouldn't describe bugs and rats as tasty personally, but that's how the article starts. So it's trying to, expose you to the idea, if not the actual experience of doing these things. So, I think my brother told me in Thailand he had fried spider, a tarantula. It was a giant, he ate a big spider, a crunchy big spider that was fried. I've never gone that far. Maybe some of you have had stranger things than me, but they make claims to a few different types of exotic foods here that generally the people around the world, when they hear the idea of eating these things, they consider them exotic. So vocabulary is a good point to focus on in this particular article. They use some good words to describe food and how the food is judged, you might say. There is a huge obsession with cooking and food products. There always has been, but now since we have YouTube and the internet, you probably know some of the most famous chefs in the world. There's a whole bunch of cooking programs. There's famous Korean chefs, Chinese chefs, Japanese chefs. There's the British guys, Jamie Oliver and Gordon Ramsay. And there's American chefs. They're from all over the world, and they're celebrities. And there were celebrity chefs in the past. Quite often, they would have been employed by the king, and the king would have paid them more, and they would have had a reputation, or another rich person would have employed a chef. So, you know, the history of chef celebrity goes back hundreds of years. So it's not surprising now that with the internet, we have all these people, you know, creating things and showing us what things we would like to eat. Now, a lot of these things that are in the list are sort of outside of that celebrity menu that we usually see. They're always creative, but they don't usually use these types of ingredients because these ingredients are, I think probably the best word to describe them is strange. It doesn't matter if there's millions of grasshoppers outside. As soon as you start catching them and putting them in your soup, it becomes, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not accessible. It's just strange and uncomfortable, and we're not used to it. I read a really interesting article claiming that as the population of the world increases and we start dealing with climate change, that insects will increasingly be part of our diet. So if you're not squeamish, which is a really good word, squeamish means concerned or worried about what something looks like or tastes like. If you're not a picky eater, you're not squeamish, and you'll basically eat anything, I think the future will be okay for you, because you probably might end up eating things you normally don't. But this journalist was making the argument that if our population keeps growing and our climate gets damaged and our regular sources of food start to fail, for example, if we have a blight that affects some sort of, you know, damage happens to our potatoes or rice or wheat or corn, one of the four, as we discussed last lecture, one of the four staple crops the world uses to survive. If one of those plants gets wiped out and we don't have anything to replace it with immediately, there are literally billions of insects out there that are edible. And those might end up on your plate, especially even if you're not desperate. That might end up being part of our meals. So are we looking forward to a future of insect diet? I'm just putting it out there, okay? And I think this fits very well with the idea of strange rather than exotic, because exotic sort of includes all of these words that I have up here. And this is one of the things about English language that I think it is a benefit. It's hard if you're studying as a second language or even as a native speaker to learn all these words, but I enjoy having a word for everything. You know, when you're struggling, I just want just the right word to say something. English is a very big language. It's got the largest vocabulary of any language in the world. So the chance of you having that exact word in English is higher. So, you know, when it comes to poetry or it comes to expressing taste or food or feelings, English has a very rich vocabulary, which may be frustrating as you're learning it sometimes if you're doing tests, but I'm not going to give you a vocabulary test. I just want you to learn new words. So as you're doing your writing and as you're describing food here, you have a lot of options. And one of the things that I would caution you against is just using machine translation or your Korean English or Chinese English or French English dictionary in a straight transliterary sense, because if you translate literally, you end up with sometimes the wrong word, because there are multiple words that have what we call nuance, and that's what we're talking about today. When I put these words up here, they can all be used to describe the same situation, but there are small differences between them, and in certain situations they don't match. They don't match the feeling, the situation, the taste, or whatever the action you're trying to describe. So exotic, as they call it here in the textbook, it includes a sort of range of meaning. So Something can be strange and exotic, or it can be one or the other. Something can be exotic but not strange. It's possible because they have overlapping meanings. So the strangeness is key for exotic, but for it to be exotic, it also kind of has to be uncommon. So if everybody's eating it, even though you think it's strange, if everybody is eating it, like I'll just take a Korean example, bandegi. Bandegi is one of the weirdest looking things I've seen in Korea. It's like, I think it's in English some kind of silkworm pupa or larva. It's like looks like a little bug, and it's supposed to grow. But they like soak these in soy sauce and put them in a can or put them in a side dish, and they're very salty, a little bit sour, a little bit bitter, and a little bit salty. I happen to like them, but they look like little alien babies, I have to say. These bandegi are very popular as a side dish in Korea, especially if you're drinking some alcohol. They serve them in a small little dish. They're everywhere, though. This is not something that's hard to get. A foreigner would probably say that's exotic, but a Korean would say, no, there's nothing exotic about bandege. They look strange, but I agree with you there. But they're not exotic. Any bar you can you go to, you can basically, any bar in Hof in Korea, you can get them as a side dish. So having like easy access to something makes it less exotic. Okay, so along with that, luxurious, bandegi is also not really luxurious, although that's not necessarily a criteria. Expensive sort of goes along with being less common. So you can say if something's unique, that means there's only one of them. You might say to be, more accurate, almost unique is like there's incredibly rare. You can modify the adjective even more because it's not unique literally means one. But if you want to be more accurate, you can say almost unique, or incredibly rare means there's very few. Something like that might be, caviar, beluga caviar, or something like that. Something that very few people in the whole world can eat, and it's $100 for a gram. I have no idea what the prices are, but price, access, perception of luxury, they all play into an idea, which means something's exotic, right? It's got to be foreign, something that's not around, and that's where different comes into play, as it's something that you're not familiar with. So some things can be a little bit exotic and some not, but yeah, you will see, I guess, being a foreigner, somebody who lives in Korea, who was born in Canada, and an immigrant, basically, since I've been here so long, a resident of Korea, but not having been born here, I'm not surprised by Korean food anymore. And then when somebody comes from North America and they have their first sundae or something like that, and they think, oh man, this food is really weird, I think to myself, well, I kind of thought that 13 years ago, but sundae is really very common, average food. There's nothing exotic about that. Okay? So, like I said, perception and grounding your writing in a certain point of view is very important. So, all of you are taking your own perspective, and you got to remember that's what it is. Whatever country you're from, whatever education and class background you come from, be aware of that's what your perspective is. So if you're going to call something exotic, you kind of have to set up some criteria and explain why you think it's exotic. Now, I'm going to be lenient today, and since it's Chuseok, there's going to be no homework this week. You're just finishing up your assignments and handing them in. And we did some homework in the book last week, so there will be no homework for next week. So you can just watch this video lecture and enjoy your holiday. I would like to just read a short section of the chapter, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about in terms of the perception of something being exotic or not. National Geographic here is trying to take some sort of global perspective. So they're looking at things like, they're focusing on things like strange or rare or different. Not so much on the luxury thing, just something that that is in some cases really hard to get or makes somebody imagine something uncomfortable. So it starts out by saying, would you like some chicken feet? How about frog's legs? Well, you can't say no to a 50-year-old egg. It's a delicacy that people pay a lot of money for, believe it or not. People in different parts of the world eat just about everything from elephants' trunks to monkey brains. Now, pretty much all of those things are strange in the list. Some of them kind of fit all the criteria. Like the 50-year-old egg is expensive, it's rare, it's a delicacy. It's a strange idea. It's exotic because it's from, I believe, China. It fits all the criteria, so that's definitely exotic. Elephant trunk, exotic too, although highly illegal. And you shouldn't be eating endangered species. Let me just put that out there. The desire for these super exotic animal foods, meat from bear gallbladders or livers, and pieces of elephants and tigers that are supposedly giving you longer life or curing diseases and stuff. This is some of the main reason that these animals get killed needlessly, is because the price is incredibly high, and only somebody who's extremely rich can pay the price, so that it's worth it for these illegal hunters to kill them. So let me just say, eating monkey's brains, especially if the monkey is not dead, is cruel. And, trying to eat animal products from animals that are endangered is running the risk of wiping out those animals completely. Chicken's feet is not that exotic. I've had them before in Korea. They certainly taste, the Koreans, I shouldn't say we, but hey, I'm half Korean now. I'm a Canadian Korean, if you want to say. I've had buldak before. It tastes like fire. It was a pretty terrible experience. When I was younger, I had to do it. I kind of enjoyed the process, but yeah, it was not very good to digest. And they're very chewy, and there's lots of bones in them. The whole feeling felt exotic to me. But again, the criteria sort of includes not being easy to get. Like you'd have to get it. But buldak is not that hard to find. You can go to a Korean place and eat chicken feet pretty easily. It's still a popular dish. Frog's legs, I've never seen in Korea. Maybe they do eat them. But I had them in Quebec when I was young. And I don't know, they look strange, but I wouldn't really call frog's legs exotic because they do taste like chicken. And I had a bunch of them at a buffet in Quebec when I was young. And I didn't think very much of it. I didn't think it was, the experience itself didn't feel very exotic. I just felt like I was at a buffet with my family, and my dad said, hey, there's some frog's legs. And my mom said, oh my God, that's gross. And then my dad and I ate a bunch of them, and it wasn't a big deal. Some places, some countries you can go, and they kind of cook things and they keep the shape of the animal, whatever it is, be it an insect or frog's legs or chicken feet. And when you can actually see the shape of the animal, I think that makes you a little bit more squeamish. That's the word I used earlier. It makes it feel stranger when you're eating something that still has the same shape as a piece of the animal when it's alive. But these are all criteria that I'm using to argue whether something is exotic or not. Right? So as usual, there are questions that follow, about, content, the vocabulary stuff. There's comprehension. One student asked me, about the critical thinking question. I got an email last week about the critical thinking section on each chapter. Yes, how do you solve those? the critical thinking questions are not meant to be solved. I think that's the wrong word. So just so you know, there's no wrong or right. There's no right or wrong answer when it comes to critical thinking. It's just to think about the reasons why things are happening. So let me just give you an example in this chapter so that you can get more comfortable with doing these questions. You have to be logical, and you have to explain, and you have to go beyond what the text actually gives you in terms of information. So when you do the comprehension question, the answer to the question is going to be in the text, right? And in that sense, like the student said, you can solve that question because it's asking you to search for the information in the text and just, copy it or provide it in your own words. But a critical thinking question or discussion question is asking you to debate, argue, or give your opinion about the ideas in the text. And a critical thinking question is asking you to go beyond the text and maybe apply or think of ideas that would counter, critique, or cause the understanding of the text to be different, right? So they go through this whole list here of different things in the text, and they say, okay, there's blowfish in Japan that might kill you. There's fish heads in Southeast Asia that people believe are tastier than the rest of the fish, so they eat them instead, right? And it goes through all the way down to the bottom where they talk about insects like termites, ants, and bees are delicacies to many people. In Africa, people fight over termite nests. They eat the termites alive and say that they taste like pineapple. In India, people make the ants into paste and eat them with curry. Now, it's quite possible that those things are delicious. I have no idea. You might be an expert at making ant curry or at, termites that taste like pineapple. I don't doubt that there's a distinct flavor there, but we have to question, like, would they be delicacies in countries like that? That are generally poor and developing, and that they don't have many options. Like if they were going to have a steak, or they were going to have fresh fish, or they were going to have, Italian meal or kimchi jjigae. If they had all of those choices, would they be fighting over termite nests? Is the reason that they're fighting over termite nests is because the termites are so good? Or is it because that they have that's the best they have available to them? It's questions like this that you have to. The text doesn't really answer those questions for you. You have to think about them yourself. Are people eating things out of necessity? Are they eating them because they love them, because they're expensive? Like, really, are we eating these blowfish in Japan? Are we eating them because they're so delicious that we would risk our life? That's a question you have to ask if you want to be critical about is this really what it is? Or is it some sort of social or related thing where it's a status, like risking your life and having a chef that is so skilled that he can prepare the fish the right way that you don't die is worth paying a certain amount of money. I don't know if I would pay Shimanwan to eat a fish that tasted slightly better than a cheaper fish, and with the knowledge that every bite might kill me. These are the things you have to think about when you're analyzing and when you're writing your own work too. I want you to think critically. So far, I think many of the students are getting the idea. Don't just take a simplistic view and regurgitate information from places that you find good information on the internet. But I want to know what you think, and when you think about it, I want you to try and think critically, whether it's your writing or somebody else's. Okay, so that is it. You don't have to do the questions at the end of this chapter. We'll stop our lesson for today, and please enjoy your holiday and be safe. And I will see you again next Tuesday for chapter 3. Have a good holiday.